trees look after themselves. So really, it's about soil management. We were talking about watering, fertilizing, things like that. Fertilizing is not as important as one might think, although to keep a healthy tree, one wants it to be growing and developing, so you could use fertilizer. But the most important thing is the balance between oxygen and water. If the tree has too much water, it drowns, literally. If it has too much oxygen, it dries out and dies. So that is the critical factor. So what do you mean by that process? Now, here are two trees. This is one in the traditional pot style, and this is a Chinese elm. Now, if you look at that, it's a very, very, and feel free to come up, please don't touch it too much, but you can come up after we're done and have a look. The soil there is very open. It has plenty of space for oxygen. So therefore, although I would use a Japanese soil called Akadama and others, if you're starting this off, you're going to use something like Jonin is number 1 with about 1/3 of that, and maybe 2/3 of gravel, fine gravel, because that gives you a very open mix. And when if I put that into a pot of water and lifted it out, the water would, not all the water, but most of the water would fall through the holes in the bottom, because it's a very open mix. That has the benefit of getting that balance of oxygen and water right. It has the disadvantage of, if you've got very hot weather, you better check it, because it could dry out. So there's so much behind this. I mean, I've been doing bonsai for 15 years, and I'm really only a beginner in many ways when you look at some of the masters in Japan. I've been out with masters in Japan, and really the knowledge that they have at a horticultural level and at a design level is phenomenal. So soil is the key factor. Now, when we come to soil, you may go to the local garden centre or Sainsbury's or something like that and say, oh, a little bonsai tree. Nothing wrong with that. But you might find that the soil in which it is was potted in China or Japan or somewhere else. The problem with that is that soil might not be the best for this climate. And so therefore, at the right time of year, you may want to repot that tree and put it into the open mixture that I've talked about. Now, what time of the year would that be? Well, normally springtime, round about March time, is a good, safe time, because the tree has built up all its strength over the winter. It's been putting all its energy into the trunk, and now it's got the time to send out leaves and what have you. So therefore, if it's a deciduous tree, round about early March. If it's a pine tree, we'll leave it to about early April. So that would be the best time to repot your tree. Now, of course, some of those trees may not be known in this country for normal growth, because they're very often pines, which are sort of vines, which grow in the Far East. In which case, it's still the right time of the year to do it. But try and find the name of the tree out when you're buying it, and then you can look on this wonderful thing called the internet and find out, well, how do I look after my tree? And they'll give you lots of information. There's lots of information about all these various varieties, stranges, and so get the soil right first, and constantly look at it. I mean, I've got about 80-odd trees, so I spend an hour every morning going round every one of them, because this tree might need water, that tree might not. So you've got to do it on an individual basis. So remember that just when you're buying trees. Now, where do I start? Where do I get these trees from? Yes, you can get them from nurseries, and there is a company here up in Bangor in Northern Ireland called Mini Tree, tiny trees or Mini Tree Bonsai. and it's run by a chap called Mark Conn. Very good dealer and a very honest dealer, someone who, it's expensive, but will give you the advice that you need even as a follow-up service. There is a bonsai source in Dublin as well. I don't know it, but it has a good reputation as well. So that's one way that you can buy bonsai, or potential bonsai. But as was hinted at, you could go to garden centres and you could see material which could be used as the basis for a bonsai quite easily. I didn't bring it with me tonight because I got it in a special area for reasons. But I got a Japanese maple, which has a lovely long trunk which is full of movement. And that was got in a garden centre for £10. All I did was repot it, and it's now a bonsai tree which someone offered me £80 for, you know. And all I did was reduce some of the leaves here and there, you know. So if you have a look, when you're walking around a garden centre, have a look at it and say, well, could I see a tree like that somewhere in it? It may not be absolutely perfect here, but if you look at, and here's two varieties that I think you could find very, very useful. Cotoneaster. Now, for those of you who know what Cotoneaster or Untitled, it's a little tiny leafed tree which has flowers and then has little berries, so it gives you a lot of bang for the buck, I think the term is. And that is a very common tree that grows in this country very strongly. So Cotoneaster, horizontals, there are a whole range of Cotoneasters, but some of them have larger leaves. So look for the small leaf variety. And let's imagine for the moment that this is in a garden centre. It's possibly not going to have as much taper as that, and I'll come back to taper for that. But it might have a huge, big, long piece straight up here. And so I look at it and say, well, if I remove that long piece, there's the basis of a tree in there somewhere. So look around your garden centres, and you will find that there's material there that you might use as the basis of a bonsai tree. Another thing that you could do, let's imagine that you have a tree in your garden, and let's say this is it, and you say, oh look, that top part there just looks like a tree already, okay? So what you could do is to take what's called a layering. And some of you know what a layering is, but just for those in case you don't, what you do is you take a ring of the bark off completely all the way around, and you scrape it so that, and this is full of roots. They are not the normal roots, they're like Chinese beanstalks, you know, they're very breakable, so very brittle, so just be careful. But after 6 months or so, you take the black plastic, put clear plastic on first, then put black plastic. The black plastic is there to heat up, keep it warm. The clear plastic is, when you take the black plastic off, you can see if there's any roots in there. If there's no roots in there, leave it, not doing any harm. And then eventually, I'll cut that off there, and I've got an even smaller concept than this one, right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, I've been throwing lots of information at you, and for those, particularly those people who ask questions about some of the things I've said, any questions before I move on? Okay. Yes?
In the earlier any tree?
Oh, it's a good question. Most trees, the ones that you, the plants, let's put it this way, the plants that you wouldn't be able to air layer are those, you know, you get plants which are hollow in the middle, and you know, they cut them off and there's a hollow like that. You wouldn't be able to air layer that. But anything with a woody stem, you could air layer. I would know, it might be the first time we done that type of tree. But no, it's mostly woody stems. because you know the trunk of a tree is layers, and those layers are all active, moving water up and down, up and down, up and down. Okay, so that's soil is the most important. We've now talked about beginning bonsai and getting your own bonsai, and again, don't spend a lot of money because you've got to learn. I mean, it is a process of learning, and for those who have got bonsai, you know how many times in the early years you don't make a success. But it's all the whole thing. I mean, this has been going on for well over 1,000 years. I mean, it started actually in India, where growers of vegetables and plants, edible plants, wanted to move them from one end to the other. So the Vedic civilization was one of those fascinating civilizations. They started saying, well, let's try and put these plants into pots, and then we can move them around, etc. Then the Chinese saw this, the Chinese emperors saw that, and the Chinese emperors were so loved by their people that they stayed in their castles. And they said, well, I wouldn't mind having some of those lovely plum trees and so on, etc., etc. So can you do that for me? And that's where Penjing, except it may not be very good, but Penjing, which is the Chinese word for bonsai. And then it transferred over to bonsai in Japan. And whereas in Chinese Penjing, they make trees which look beautiful, but they're based on Chinese characters and things like that. The Japanese came along and said, no, let's hang on. We're systematic people. We want formal upright, informal upright, wind-swept, cascade, and variations of this. So they put a system into it and an organization into it. And that's where we get bonsai today. All right, questions?
Yes, if you have a broken branch, okay, are there two things you could do? Could you do something to repair that break in the branch, or if not, could you take that broken branch and do something to reset it, to reseed it, to grow again?
Well, you could turn it into a layering. You could do that. You could tape it up very tightly. It will always be weak, but I'm hearing maybe personal experience. Is that right?
Well, I had a broken branch and I resealed again, but
no. To take the branch off, you'll have to be aware. It depends on the size. I mean, you could take this Chinese elm here is a very easy variety to make seedlings of, because you could chop almost any of these branches off and put them into the right sort of soil, and they would take, and you would have a whole series of little Chinese elms. But not all varieties are like that. Japanese maples are a standard bonsai tree, and they grow in this country too. They weren't natural to this country, but they grow in this country. So most trees, but again, something I haven't said up to now, of course I'm talking about outside. Now, that really is important too, because many of the trees that you get in supermarkets, little bonsai trees, are meant for indoors. And I'm talking about trees which are growing outdoors. I've got 80 trees and all of them are outdoors. I've got one small tree which is indoors, but indoors is difficult because central heating dries the air out. So if, however, you've got an indoor bonsai, get a little tray, not as big as this one, but a tray like this, fill it with gravel, fill that with water, and then you're creating a whole moist atmosphere around it. And that would be the way to handle indoors. Now, another thing to remember indoors, the light at a window drops by, I think, 40% within 12 inches of the window. Keep that in mind. But also you've got temperature to worry about. So you don't want to be too close to a window that gets a lot of frost. So all of those things you're trying to juggle. And the tree will tell you when it's happy, and the tree will tell you when it's unhappy. Yeah. So just remember those things for indoor bonsais. But trees outside will deal with temperatures going as low as -10, -8, etc., as long as they are protected. And when I say protected, a lot of my trees are on benches, right? So in the winter they will go under the benches because that gives them a certain amount of protection from frost which is coming down, etc. So put them under a little bit of protection. If you can't do that, you can get I don't know what it's called. It's like very fine cloth. I wonder, can anybody think of it? You put it to protect trees against frost, in fact. So you would drape it like that over the night or when there's a lot of frost around, but then take it off when there's sunshine around. So that would be a way of protecting the trees as well. All right. Any other questions? Yeah. All right. My time up? Okay. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed getting those as well.
Yeah, thank you very much.